My name is Raina Berry. I have been in this space for over 2 decades. It's kind of hard to imagine that I am at that point in life, but because of that, I have a wealth of knowledge and experience, a lot of which I learned the hard way. When I mean hard, I mean tears, temper tantrums, just everything I have learned the hard way. So, one thing that is very unique, I am probably considered a disruptor in my organization. I am constantly challenging how and why we do things, asking those questions that sometimes probably pushes the buttons of some of our leaders because they are not used to getting challenged. However, to challenge is to break outside of a comfort zone. To break outside of a comfort zone is to grow. I facilitated a class this week on leadership skills on how to effectively lead through change. And one of the things that I wanted to share with my audience that now that I'm over 20 years in, I fully understand why change is scary. I fully understand why getting out of your comfort zone is not a place that you want to be. I coined it as a necessary evil. And I gave the analogy that, when I vacation, when I holiday, I will pay for maybe a first class ticket or extra leg room. I am 6 feet tall, so anytime I can get extra space, I get it. If I go to a resort, I will require or request any additional services that bring about comfort. And so in a space where people pay extra and go above and beyond for comfort, it almost seems contradictory to expect people to want to step outside of what's comfortable, especially when they don't know what's on the other side. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today entails questioning the why, but it's done so that we can, and when I talk about the term sustainable, questioning the why, understanding the why, all of those things help to build sustainable training. Um, I am going to touch on some continuous improvement models um, that are somewhat what has helped build this instructional design model. It's kind of a cycle, or I say kind of a trilogy or triple effect of training. Um, so if you all have any questions, definitely pop the questions in the chat. I will get to those once we finish. Um, and I'll say it again at the end, but please feel free to reach out to me and I'll include my email address and information. Please feel free to reach out to me to connect if you just want to have an open discussion about some things going on in your organization, or if you're looking for some resources or tools. I will do my very best to be that kind of resource, that tool, that unlimited place where you can go and get more information. So let's get started. So I want to talk about this model, right? So I have 3 models: Lean, Six Sigma, and ADDIE. So as we know, Lean and Six Sigma, they are models that focus on continuous improvement. They don't have they don't have a direct space in the world of learning and development, but they indirectly impact and help to add value to any learning deliverable that is being created, right? So I call it the triple threat of training. You can jump head first and you can create a learning deliverable based off the request of a stakeholder, based off the request of a customer, based off the request of a business partner. that does not automatically transfer to a learning deliverable that is going to make a change or make an impact. As a person who is truly dedicated to the profession, my role is simple. My role is to increase the output of the human, quote, resources. Now, I want you to hear me. In an organization, a process is made up of two things. It's the human resource and it's a tech resource. Those two things make a process or lead to an output for an organization. It does not matter what the product, it doesn't matter the product of the organization. It could be anything from plastic cups. So if my company is Plastic Cup Incorporated, there are people who are doing some things. There is technology that's complementing the things people do. That equates a process. There are only two things that equal a process. Now, with that process comes a lot of indirect inputs and outputs. So when I go back to my job, I can't influence technology because I don't create the tech aspects. But what I can do, I can create learning deliverables that will help the output of the human, quote unquote, resource in an organization. And so as you all look at yourselves as practitioners in the field and you look at what is really my goal, how am I contributing to the success of the organization? That's your role. A lot of times in the L&D space, we have a difficult time kind of validating our work, right? How do we quantify what we do? And so I want you all to kind of understand, I am not a big proponent of boasting, I had these many hours of training, or these many leaders took this class. You can have 100 people take 100 hours worth of training. What does that equate to as far as your organization's success? How has the bottom line improved? What key metric has been altered as a result of your training deliverable? So I want you to keep in mind, Lean, Six Sigma, and ADDIE. That's kind of what I can call the trifecta of training, the triple threat of training. So we're going to look a little deeper. Lean and Six Sigma are models that maximize value while eliminating waste. As a L&D practitioner, your learning deliverables should be capitalizing from a process that has already been put in place. Your goal is to maximize the value of the human resource in the organization in an effort to eliminate waste. This is how you start to become a contributor or more of a quantitative thought partner in an organization. Now you have something to quantify with the number of hours or the number of classes or the number of training documents that you have curated. So when we look at Lean and Six Sigma, they are based in strong methodology. A lot of the key components as we go through one of the methodologies, it's just walking your way through. These are the things that I want to do to identify what's the problem, where's the deficiency, more importantly, what's the learning gap. And in my organization, I am really big on, before I start to create a course, before I hit the first keystroke to document a quick reference guide or a standard practice training aid, I need to understand what is the gap? What is the current state versus what is the desired state? And unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, and I can say this because the one I work in now, we are definitely jumping over some hurdles and running into some, to a few walls, but we're having to somehow figure out what is really the problem. Why are we not meeting the expectations as desired? And a lot of times you all may kind of have the same experiences when something is wrong in the organization, when a metric is not being met, when performance is not meeting expectations. The first go-to is training. Hey, I need training. Hey, I need your team to create this. And I always think it's comical because a lot of times their request comes from somebody who does not have any experience in the field. They just assume I can create a PowerPoint, I can tell you what my people need. And I personally take offense to that, but that's just because I have spent hours and hours really studying the profession, really studying some of the practitioners, their ideologies and their theories to really understand what does an adult need to be able to change their behavior, to change their mindset. And sometimes when you look at it, it's not the human resource. There is something else in the organization that is prohibiting performance from being where it needs to be. One of the first jobs that I had that gave me the very esteemed title of manager of learning and organizational development, I was told, hey, I need you to come in and create a customer service training. I need to create a customer service training because we're not meeting our goals on the phone. And so being very green at that time, I jumped at it. This was my opportunity to prove my worth. This was my opportunity to make them proud or really say, hey, I'm glad I hired her. And I jumped right in and created this training. I had spent hours and hours doing research. I had a theme. I actually had purchased little red toolboxes because everybody was going to leave with a toolbox of resources. Did the training. I thought I did an amazing job. And so I am waiting for all of these accolades and I'm waiting to see, yet yes, the customer service times have gotten better. We've done all these things. So about 45 days after the training, I did a follow-up with the team because I wanted to understand how has your day-to-day processes been affected since we engaged in this customer service training? Have you been more effective? Have you been able to better manage your day? Are you able to complete your task on the phone as well as off of the phone? And one of the first questions that I asked the team, and at that time the manager was present, are you all able to meet your targets or meet your goals? One of the team members looked at me and said, what do you mean goals? What goals? What targets? And the light bulb popped onto my head. Oh, they don't have targets. If you don't have a target and don't have a goal, how do you know if you're meeting expectations? How do you know if you're beating expectations? How do you know if you're not? And so I took that as a learning lesson to heart. From that point going forward, I am never going to create another learning and development, a training and development deliverable, unless I fully understand everything about the process, the expectations, what's been done in the past, and why are we here? Because had I known that there were no goals, that would have been my first act as a thought partner. Well, let's create goals. If you don't create a goal for a person, they don't have anything to strive for. If they don't know what the organization goals are, they don't have anything to measure their performance up against. And at that moment, I learned it's not a lack of knowledge. And you will hear me say this over and over again. Training, learning, all of these things They will only solve the gap if the problem is a lack of knowledge. That's the only time. That is the only time that a learning or training and development initiative or deliverable will actually close that gap. And you all may have had instances that is truly rare. It is rare that you find that it is truly a lack of knowledge as to why the associate is not performing at or above expectations. So let's go a little deeper. Now, Lean Six Sigma, what do? They will maximize your value and they will eliminate waste. Now, I'm sure you all are familiar with adding. This is the blueprint for training and development. This is that buzzword. This is this key that we hear everybody talk about. This is what we see that is mentioned in a lot of job descriptions and a lot of job postings and a lot of chat groups. Hey, are you following Addie to create your training? This is what I would say would be the final step. Before you begin an analysis of the training, you need to do these other things. And I would almost say an analysis is what we're going to talk about today. How do you conduct a thorough learning needs analysis so that the rest of your training is indeed impactful and sustainable? So you can kind of look at it like this. We're going to spend this next, where are we at? Maybe like an hour talking about conducting that learning needs analysis. A few months ago, I facilitated a course and it was somewhat on the same topics, but it was based around uncovering or unleashing your inner detective. And so if you all can kind of think of wearing multiple hats, as a learning and development practitioner, you are a detective at heart. You are required, or hopefully once you complete this session, you will understand the importance of unleashing your inner detective so that you are adding more value to your organization, to your customers, to your clients, to your stakeholders. So we covered Lean, we covered Six Sigma, and ADDIE, right? So this is model learning. All of these buzzwords, they're models. This is based off years of practitioners putting together models, kind of going back and reassessing them. And these are not the only three. There are other models that can suffice, and a lot of them mean the same things. A lot of them have become upgraded just simply based on a new practitioner or a new point of view. I assume that as the world starts to become more, or the world starts to better embrace artificial intelligence, a new model may come from that, right? So now we're having to understand how to create training because AI is now a big part of what we do. So I wouldn't doubt that there is some practitioner right now, somewhere in a office, in a lab, in a classroom, putting together the components of a model that fully incorporates artificial intelligence. So I want to introduce to you a sub-model of Lean Six Sigma. And if you all could just kind of drop in the chat, have you heard of DMAIC? DMAIC. I'm just curious as to how far you all have had an opportunity to delve into continuous improvement, Lean Six Sigma. Let me know if you've heard of the term DMAIC, or maybe if you've used it before. So, data-driven. This is one of the key components of L&D practitioners becoming value-added thought partners in the organization, right? How are you contributing to the success of your organization? What are those things that your key stakeholders, your customers, and clients are wanting to build from? And so this is important why I say data. Data drives every decision made in the organization. For some reason, when it comes to the function of L&D, they seem to feel like we don't need data, or they seem to feel like that the data that they provide is all that we need. And I think that's perhaps why when there are budget cuts or organization realignments, learning and development is sometimes the very first sector that may see cuts, right? Because we have not done our due diligence in providing our qualitative input into the organization. So I currently work for a supply chain organization that supports multiple grocery stores throughout the United States. In a supply chain organization, everything is built on a metric. If it's on-time delivery, if it's productivity of selection, if it's number of miles driven from the truckers, if it's the number of go backs, if it's inventory, all of these things are metrics that play a big role in an organization such as supply chain. And so then we have my subset learning development team. How are we able to capture a metric to show that we are adding value? And it's extremely difficult because most people feel like, well, you don't need to add value. I'm just going to tell you what I need you to do, and I want you to do it. And so early on when I started, I made it very clear. I am not the make it pretty team. And I despise being given assignments to say, hey, I need you to make a PowerPoint deck. I need you to take this information and I need you to better organize it. I need you to take this training aid and I need you to put it in a format that makes it more digestible. And I would always say, well, why are we doing this? And for a long time, there was a lot of contention back and forth because there is no value in making it pretty. When we continue to discuss the concept of data-driven quality strategies to improve processes, I really want you all to get the concept, what is needed for an adult learner to increase their output. And based off my research, a PowerPoint that has animation does not increase my output. A PowerPoint that has animation doesn't even increase my retention of the information. Animation does not equal retention, right? There are a lot of things that don't equal retention. You know, it's the thing of what is it that's needed for this adult to learn and be successful? And at the end of the day, they want to know what's in it for me. What do I get out of this? Just like you all are sitting in the session today, the goal is I want to get something out of it. Just like our associates, even if they're getting paid, when you ask them to do something that is outside of their norm, they want to understand what is my benefit. And so as I've grown in this profession, I really get down to the root of what's needed to make you more successful. What is it that I can provide you to fulfill whatever that desire is? Do you want to be more efficient at work? Does the organization need you to be more efficient? What is it that we're really getting at when we're creating these learning and training deliverables? And honestly, again, I go back to the concept. It's about increasing the output. And a lot of these things are nice to have, but they are not needed. And so we're going to talk about some of these things as we go along. So we have DMAIC, and what we're going to do is kind of step through these 5 steps of DMAIC to really focus on, as a learning development practitioner, how do you fit into this sector? How do you fit into this? Because it's almost kind of a different function. And so it depends on if your organization has continuous learning or industrial engineers, or any subset in the organization that is focused on continuous improvement or looking at waste and looking at improvement. These are actually very complementary of each other, and you'll see that as we continue to go through it. So when we look at D, you are defining the problem. So this is the point where your detective skills are now starting to ramp up. Now, in my experience, I am always told, this is the problem and this is what you need to do. And from experience, I've taken that and say, okay, you said this is a problem. The associates are not checking in the trucks. I need to create a new training aid because they need to know how to check the trucks in. Now, these are red flags. Number one, most of the time, and in my experience, training documents already exist. So if the training documents already exist, now what are we saying? Is the gap that the current training documents have inaccurate information? Or have we not taken the time to provide the associates with the accurate information that they need to be successful? So when we look at that, we have to now work with our stakeholders to kind of ask that, hey, thank you for your request. To create a stronger learning and development initiative, I need to know more. Right? Because this is a part that when I talk about this, a lot of the participants say, it sounds good, but how do I engage my stakeholder? It sounds good, but no one will listen to me. And so this is where you transition. You are now a thought partner. You are clearing space so that you can bring your own chair to the table. You don't often ask to be invited. You find a space to sit. So with that being said, when you're giving a request, acknowledge it. Thank you for the request. I like the opportunity to better understand exactly what that gap is. And however you're facing your organization, whether you are working as a consultant, whether you are getting the request from internal stakeholders, whether you have clients that are wanting to take part in your knowledge and your expertise, it's great to sell it as, I want to give you the best learning deliverable. Before I do that, I want to better understand what's going on in the organization. So, excuse me, we can do something, and it's called, we can do a project charter, right? Now, I want you to keep in mind, I'm talking about all of these terms in industrial engineer and continuous improvement, but I promise they directly correlate with learning development. They're almost like brothers and sisters in this field. Your project charter, and it doesn't have to be formal, because remember, this is for you. This is for your intents and purposes to be able to build that impactful and sustainable learning and development initiative, or whatever your output is. You want to understand, what is the focus? Why did this request come about? What is the scope of this request? What direction are we going in? What's the motivation? Before you create anything, you have to understand, why am I even getting this request? What happened in the organization that this request became a thing? So as we go through, I'm going to walk you all through a request that I had late part of last year. We have a system that manages the incoming trucks at each distribution center. It's about 15 distribution centers. This system is just yard management system. For short, we call it YMS. The request that my team received said, hey, the guards are not efficiently checking in our trucks. As a result, trucks are backed up into the interstate. As a result, our on-time deliveries are suffering. As a result, we have multiple complaints from people in the neighborhood. We've even had complaints from the police department who've had to come and direct traffic because trucks, and these are semi-trucks, they are lined up for miles and miles, and all of this blame is being shifted to the guards. So my very first question is, what makes you think it's the guards? Why are we blaming this one group of people? Is it because that they are just an easy target? Is it because we have not taken the time to look at everybody involved in the process? Is it because we've not taken the time to look at the entire process? Now, one thing that I heard that was troubling was that, hey, the guards, they are low educated. I don't think they have the capacity to check in a truck. So my first question is, are we hiring the right people for the right job? If we think that checking in a truck requires a certain level of education, a certain level of training, we should be hiring for that position. So all of these conversations are happening with our transportation department, with our HR department. All of these things are starting to happen, right? As a learning and development professional, I need to define the focus. I'm looking at the scope of this request. What's really going on? So see here, I have my detective hat on, and I have my magnifying glass, and I am going to work. I am looking for, hey, what is going on? What's happening? Why am I getting this request? What's really at the heart of what we're expecting? Now, there's something called the voice of the customer. Very self-explanatory. You want to understand, what is the current state of this? Are you looking at current training aids? Are you looking at the latest trainings? Are you looking at what does the future look like? Excuse me. Are you able to get a clear picture of all of these things? You can't create training if you don't know the current state of what's already existing. Better yet, think about the waste of creating training or creating training documents or quick reference guides, standard operating procedures for something that already exists. And so as an L&D function, that's how you help to eliminate waste for your team and your function. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. If it's created, then say, hey, it's already here. What's missing? And then there's this concept is called a value stream map. Very much industrial engineered, very much continuous improvement. This is where you will more than likely get pushback, because the question will say, well, why do you need to know this much? I told you, and this is things that I've heard from stakeholders. Hey, I told you what I need. Why do you need to understand the whole process? And so this is how you add value. Value stream mapping is just simply an overview of the process. You can't create training for a function in a process if you don't know what comes before and you don't know what comes after. Well, I'll take that back. You can create it, but it won't be impactful because you won't be able to explain that moment in time, what happens after. What are the implications if these steps are not followed? Whoever or whatever comes after that process will be impacted. What are the steps that are done before this process begins, right? What happens before? What happens if I'm writing a process for a function or a role, and what happens before was not carried out correctly? How do these people, how is this function maintained? What do I look for? And so all of these things come, you have to define your problem. You have to know as much information as you can about why you've received this request. Why is this necessary? Why is this thing happening? And so this is just that step. You're becoming a detective. Now, will you receive pushback? Yes, I have, because I'm not necessarily looked at a thought partner. And so this has always been my goal. I am a major contributor to a lot of things that happen in the organization because my function is to increase the output of the human resources in organization. And you'll hear me say that again. A lot of organizations will kind of shout, humans or our staff or our employees, they're our biggest asset. Okay, if your employees are indeed your biggest asset, I'm the asset protector, right? Just like we have the function of asset protection, someone who is very similar to a policeman or security, they help protect the tangible assets, kind of the products or whatever the goods or the services are in an organization. I'm the asset protector of the people, right? I am making sure that they are staying in place, staying where they need to be, and continuing to add value to the organization. Because now if somebody leaves the organization or if we have turnover, I consider that theft, right? That step I can't control. Is there something I could have done better as an asset protector? More than likely. And when you're able to put your role into quantifiable terms, you will now get the ears and the attention of your stakeholders, right? Because at the end of the day, there is this thing called the bottom line. Whether your organization is for profit or not for profit, whether it's government, public sector, private sector, local, federal, it's about a bottom line. And I've had experiences in all of them. And even in not-for-profit, you have to maintain a certain margin in order to continue forward. So when you can turn what you do into quantifiable terms that resonate with your requester, with your stakeholder, with your client, now you have your seat at the table. Now you can start to speak to your value and what you bring. So the D, we're done, right? So we want to define this problem. And then keep in mind, I have 3 ways to do it just for brevity of our time together. This is not an exhausted list. There are multiple ways you can define a problem. And then depending on what the request is, you may just want to use one, right? And so I definitely encourage everybody to kind of better go through and do a little more research. When is a project charter more effective versus a voice of the customer? When is a value stream map more effective? Those are things as a practitioner, you can decide based off the resources, based off the time, based off the resources, based off the requests, based off what you have from the organization. So we've done the first step. We have defined the problem. Now we have, for our own knowledge, we know, hey, what is the process? What's going on? Essentially, why am I getting this request? What is the current state versus what is the future state? And the thing that I've learned that I found so challenging and frustrating, a stakeholder can say, I need this, but they can't tell you what the current state is, nor can they tell you the desired state. And so that's why as a thought partner, you have to encourage, hey, I want to help you build results. So let's understand where we are and let's put together where we need to be. Because this is not only you adding value to the organization, you are quantifying your contribution. And now you can speak to the metrics of your role, your function, and your responsibilities. So next, we will talk about measuring the process performance. This is one of the things where now you go a little bit further. You want to understand what's really happening, right? So I'm going to start from the bottom. When we look at the Pareto chart, the idea that 80% of an organization's problems come from 20% of something going wrong. So it means this one small thing is having a huge effect on the organization. And you want to understand what is the frequency that this thing is causing a problem. So for us, one of the biggest things that we continuously deal with is turnover. We struggle and continue to struggle with keeping our staff. Now, a big part of our workforce are required to operate powered industrial trucks, powered industrial equipment, while selecting product and getting instructions, much like a headset that I currently have on. Well, these jobs are extremely physical, extremely, to the point where people will come in and the next day, so people will come in for a shift, very new. The next day, they don't come back because they physically can't get out of bed. They have underestimated how much they've lifted. Some of them think they're in shape and they just physically can't come. In our distribution centers, we have a freezer and a refrigerated section. And we've had a lot of people say, hey, I'm used to the cold, I can handle it. After about 2 hours, they literally leave and just don't come back. All right. And so the request was, we need a new onboarding. We're not training our associates when they come in as new hires. Now, after defining the problem, it wasn't that we were not properly training them. We discovered that from day one, and I count day one as, hey, I'm going to your organization's website. I'm applying for this job. I'm speaking with a recruiter. I'm doing an interview. We found that, guess what? The recruiter is not giving an accurate portrayal of what life is like in the organization. It's not fun. There is nothing fun about it. You have to multitask. You have to be able to continuously lift extremely heavy products for hours and hours in extreme conditions. Sometimes the warehouse can be 80 degrees. Sometimes it can be -20, depending on where you're working. If you tell me that, I immediately know this is not this place for me. But if you paint something that's promising and I think I can do it, I'm going to try. Well, all of those think they can do it and all those triers are what lead to very high levels of turnover. So now my team is getting requests for, we need a new training program for our new hires. We need a new onboarding. We're not effectively doing this, they're leaving. Well, before day one, what is their experience? And that's when I talk about defining the problem. So now we're at measuring process performance. What is a process, right? So this is very much on the heels. Once you define the problem, now you have to understand what is the process. And I talked a little bit about it. When you're creating a learning deliverable, you just can't start in the middle. You have to know what's before, what's after, what's causing this. So I will go back to my previous example. When I worked for an organization, and a call center was a big part of what they did, my request was they need customer service training because their times on the phone are too long. So this was an assumption. They're on the phone too long. Hence, it is keeping them from completing their paperwork. And their paperwork was completing certificates, validating documents, making sure that the customers receive their certifications in a timely manner. Well, guess what? There was no process, right? And so as I said, and again, this is where you are now the detective. I actually had to sit in their workspace and document how long each phone call was. What was the nature of the phone call? What did they do from the time they picked the phone up to the time they put the phone down? How many times did the phone ring? At what point were they able to do their paperwork, right? And so me measuring the process performance, I was able to uncover so many things. Number one, they didn't start answering the phones until lunchtime. Now, we service 4 different time zones. And so if you don't operate your phone until lunchtime, it's not just lunchtime for you, it's lunchtime for half of the United States. And we also service some countries internationally. So it's lunch for you. So at the peak of you opening your phones, not only are the employees on lunch, but so does the rest of the world. So this is a time that they are calling to check on their certification, to check on their paperwork. So number one, if I look at the process, yes, there is an influx of calls at 12 o'clock. And at the moment there's an influx of calls, there's a decrease in call representatives to take the call. That's efficiency. That's inefficiency in a process. Training has nothing to do with that. Again, remember what I said, training is the solution when there's a lack of knowledge. The only lack of knowledge that they had there was they had an inefficient process. That's it. And so coming in, I'm trying to design for something that does not exist. So we talked about it. There's also this process map and a capability analysis. All of these things are what you're using to understand, what am I designing for? So in the title of this, I talked about sustainability. If you want to deliver and create something that's sustainable, and this means something that is self-sustaining, that once you put it into place, there are some barriers around it that help it succeed, it's going to keep going. But if you don't know the process, if you don't know the glitches in the process, then there are some things that will help you be less successful when you're designing your training deliverable. So we are measuring the process performance. Again, you got to understand what's going on. You got to know where it starts, where it stops. What are the pauses in between and why are they there? This helps you understand what are you designing for, who are you designing for, what type of training needs to be designed. All of those things are now starting to show themselves to you. You are the L&D detective. You are putting on your detective hat, better understanding. And again, all of these things are done before you start to create your first aid, before you look at your first e-learning, before you look at your first template, you're going through these steps. So next, this is the analyze. This is probably my most famous part. You now have to determine the root cause. This is where your experience and the reality of the organization now come together, right? Perception, reality. When those two come together, it is amazing what you get out of it. You want another root cause analysis. This is where you are now using everything that you've created, or you've collected from defining the problem and measuring the process performance to understand, is training really the solution? Is a lack of knowledge really what's keeping the human resources to performing at the highest standard? And trust me, from my experiences, it rarely is. This is rarely the solution. Now, there are 3 things you can use. Root cause analysis is probably the most simple, and you can find multiple, I'll say platforms or templates that will help you conduct a root cause analysis. The failure mode and effect analysis. It identifies the product, the service, and the process failures. Now, it may be that you can't do all of these things on your own, and this is where you possibly serve as a thought partner with others in your organization, should you have that function of industrial engineer, continuous improvement, etc. You may have some project managers, you may have some product managers. This is where collaboration really starts to come to the forefront. There's also the multivariate chart. The goal is to detect different types of variations within a process, right? So in my current organization, we have about 15 distribution centers. They span different demographics. Some are unionized, some are not. Some are smaller, some are just massive buildings. Although there's a standardization, there's variation from one site to another. So because there's variation from one site to another, you have to understand, where does that fit into a process? So just because I design a learning deliverable for one site, it does not mean it is going to be as effective for another site. And so I need to understand that as a practitioner, because I need to understand, is it something that is a network initiative, or is it just to one site? So your root cause analysis is what's going to either take you from, hey, this is definitely a lack of knowledge, they don't know how to do this, or I need to go back to the requester because this is what I found. And in my career, I have found that sometimes technology is not wired correctly, or it's not configured correctly to the needs of the organization. I've been able to be a major influence in service vendors that we have, because my analysis has showed me, hey, it's not that the associates are not doing their job effectively or efficiently, it's that this process is not capturing the number of inputs versus the number of outputs. I have been able to make recommendations for new roles and responsibilities with HR, because we found out that there are some things for a role that the person is not qualified for. Again, that's not training. I am serving as a thought partner in my organization to close the gap. Again, in my profession, I am committed to increasing the output of the human resources. Again, I can label myself as an asset protector, and the assets are the humans in the organization. So if you want me to protect the asset, allow me to do this work, to be a thought partner, to make a recommendation based off what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've been able to assess. Now, again, as I mentioned before, the root cause analysis, the failure mode and effect analysis, and the multivariate chart, there are but 3 different ways to complete a root cause analysis. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are multiple ways that this can be done, some more intricate, some more basic. But this is really the synthesization. Okay, you want to synthesize what you defined and what you measured. This is when you're pulling all the information together, say, okay, based off what I found, this is where the glitch is. This is the gap. And you being able to present the gap based off data, again, because this is a data-driven process, now your stakeholders are more willing to listen, your stakeholders are more willing to engage, And now you are adding value because this again, we are eliminating waste and we're maximizing our value, right? So this is a crossroads for you as a learning and development practitioner. This will let you know, all right, I'm ready to go to the ADDIE process. I'm ready to start designing and developing because it's indeed a lack of knowledge. Or there are some other things that I see. Let me take this information back to the stakeholder. Now, I want you to understand this doesn't automatically take you out of this project because more than likely, when we uncover, for example, if it's technology, if we find out that the technology is not configured correctly and we need to go back to that vendor to make some updates, now the request is, hey, my L&D team, can we now document the new processes? There you are. Now you are designing, developing, and implementing and evaluating because you already know you are creating these things because it is a new process and you know why it is a new process. So the goal is to not only be a thought partner, but more than likely, if learning is not the performance gap, there is something that will help to close that gap that will need to be documented. That's where you do come back around and now you are an L&D practitioner / thought partner. So we're in the analysis. We know which way we're going. Are we thought partner? Or are we back to L&D practitioner? So now, what happens if, hey, this is something that learning is not the issue. This we want to improve, right? So the I in DMAIC, we're going to improve performance by eliminating that root cause. Whatever we find out was root cause, this is now our opportunity to serve as thought partners to just knock it out. We want to, hey, take this, let's find out what it is, let's zap it, let it be done for good. You are a thought partner. And so this is why, and I'm going to say this, in your organization, how you face your organization, how you see the trajectory of your career, this is where you take control. Now, the thing that I love are Kaizen events, right? This is where you go in and you document from beginning to end what happens. What's step 1, 2, step 2B, step 2C. You want to know everything. This is where you bring everybody into the room, right? You want to get ideas. You want to get what motivates. You want to get all your people kind of into this process. Now, again, based off your position, you can run a Kaizen event. You are the facilitator of new ideas. Everybody has a reason why something is happening. As a facilitator of a Kaizen event, you are pulling all those together and you're helping to organize that. Somebody in that room knows why that gap is a thing. Your job as a facilitator of a Kaizen event is to what? Pull it out of people. And so you see how a Kaizen event may not be the direct responsibility of somebody in learning development, but facilitation is a big part of what L&D does. And facilitation is so very important because it takes someone that can navigate different ideas, that can bring the best out of people, that can help people articulate ideas when they can't. So it's indirectly related, but it's a place where you can shine. And then the design of the experiences, you solve for problems from complex processes or systems that may be influencing or factors, right? Again, I am sharing this information because it may not be directly related to your role, but this is something that you can branch off as a facilitator of people sharing their ideas. So think about any of the times when you had to facilitate a class or a training, even if it was something that you created, or if you were facilitating somebody else's training, guess what? A facilitator of ideas is someone that can help to evoke those thoughts, help people to work together, help people see alternative views. That is your role. So when it comes to improving performance by eliminating root causes, again, depending on how you face your organization, this may be outside of what you do, but you have done the work. Now you can pass this on and say, hey, I can still facilitate the meeting. I can facilitate the ideas. And again, remember, once we understand what's really that gap or really that kind of hole in performance, there's still probably going to be a need for a standard practice training aid, a quick reference guide. There's going to be a need for some formal documentation to explain what is this new thing that we are now doing in our organization. We understand that there's a gap. We've captured it. Now let's document that best practice. And so the last thing that we kind of talk about in DMAIC is control. And so this is the thing where sustainability. How do you, as a asset protector, right? You are protecting the people in the organization. How do you make sure that this root cause that we've identified, how do you make sure that it's gone for good? How do you make sure that it doesn't pop back up? You can work to develop control plans, right? And so if it's a thing of, well, is this something? So say that we discover it's a lack of knowledge. And this is compliance training. And these rules change every 6 months. How often do we train them? If you figure it's a process, but the process is very intricate and you need to make sure that people are not skipping steps. How often do you need to test their knowledge of the process to ensure that they're still following the steps, right? That is where, as practitioners, if the gap is lack of knowledge, this is where you understand, what does support look like for this information? I have not had to take a driving test in decades. I don't know that if I had to take a written test, I don't know if I would pass it. I have no idea. I'm trying to teach my son how to drive, but in turn, he's teaching me what he learned in driver's ed and making me realize what I have been doing for all these years may not be the right way. And so, would it be beneficial for adults who've had their licenses after 10 years to maybe do a refresher course? Would that cut down on the number of accidents and incidents and near misses? I don't know. But that's just an example of determining what is the right amount of retraining, refresher, what is the right amount of assessment that needs to be done so that you can sustain any gains that you have in your performance or your behavior, right? So this is the control plan. And this is where you work alongside your business partners, your stakeholders, your clients, your customers to understand, how do we maintain the success that we've had? And that's basically what this control is about. And so what you don't want to do is go through all the intricacies of all of these steps and then say, oh, we're back here a year later because we didn't put a plan in place to make sure that we sustained it. And a lot of times that plan is just accountability. Who is going to be accountable? How often do we check? How do we know that we are starting to fail? All of those things make a big impact. So we have walked through DMAIC. We have walked through how you all can be forward-facing practitioners, how you all can be thought partners, all of those things. Once we get through these steps and we know this is a matter of training or it isn't, now your instructional design can begin, right? Now it's ready to design because you are clear on what the process is, what the performance gap is, who it affects, how it affects them, and how do you sustain any gains that you have. So that kind of brings us to the end of our session today. I think some things that I want you to remember: if you are in the space of learning and development or somewhere adjacent, you are an asset protector. You are protecting the most valuable parts of the organization, and those are the individuals, right? That is your goal. Every asset you protect is a step for you. Number 2, develop a mindset of detectives. You have to learn how to dig deeper into what the request is and really uncover what is the gap. Number 3, position yourself as a thought partner in an organization. You are never just L&D or just any, you are a thought partner that has strong contributions to the success of the organization. When you face yourself that way, you will force the other leaders in the organization to start positioning you in such a way.